Hey Evan, how are you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you doing today?
Doing good. Feels good to be on the other side of the table this time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So before we bring Jason on, I want to get through a little bit of housekeeping here. For those of you guys who don't know, the Enduring Minds podcast. First off, welcome to the Enduring Minds podcast. We explore the intersection between mental health and endurance sports here. It's a men's mental health podcast. And we want to break the stigma associated with speaking up and out with the show. This show is part of the Everyday Athlete Podcast Network, brought to you by Run Try Bike. We're the premier voice of the everyday athlete. We bring you the best human interest stories in endurance sports. There's 9 shows now, including the newly launched Melon and MVP with Angela Hollowell. There's endless inspiration, and we tell inspiring stories about a lot of shit, including red velvet cake. So just wanted to get that housekeeping out of the way. Let everybody know that there is a podcast episode coming out for What's in Your Earbuds this Friday. And yeah, I think that's everything I have on my housekeeping notes. So I don't want to go too deep into this. I'm really excited to bring Jason onto the show. And without further ado, let's bring Jason up front. Jason, how are you doing?
Nervous. No lie. Straight up nervous about
Man,
this.
show me your palms. Show me your palms. Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
sweaty. You
Yeah,
can tell.
I can see that. Yeah. Yeah.
Knees are weak too.
I have my fidget spinner in the form of a pen in my hand as well. So
Well, we're really excited to be on the other side of this conversation, and also to obviously Evan and I have different dynamics with you. I work with you every single day. You're a friend, you're my business partner. So we work together very closely. And Evan and I have very similar questions. And we both have our own questions. And we also have our own perspectives. So there's going to be a lot of like different angles of like trying to get deep into the core of like who you are. And we're very excited to dive into this conversation. So I want to get this going with a focus around Run Try Bike, because a big part of what we live and breathe is our business, and our business is in the digital media space. As we talked about this a little bit yesterday, I mean, we text every day, we communicate every day, and this is something we check with each other on. But our work really requires us to engage on multiple like social media platforms. And Evan, I want you to chime in on this as well, because you're building your personal brand as well. And all of us are very active on social media. Uh, One of the things it's not well spoken about in the industry, about what impact social media has on your mental health. For us, it's twofold, because when you log into Run Try Bike, you are not only making the comparisons uh, of business and entrepreneurship and our business space, you are also comparing yourself as an endurance athlete. So you have to deal with this twofold comparison every single day. How do you manage that, and what kind of impact does that have on you?
um, when Mark Zuckerberg released this idea of um, community notes versus moderators, and people were leaving Meta to go to Blue Sky, my first reaction was not another fucking social media platform. Like, I just can't do it. Like, I just don't want to be on another place that's going to distract me, that's going to take time, that's going to do, all the things that social media does. And so it it created terror, honestly. Like, okay, but what if we're not there as a company? What happens then? And eventually I did create a Blue Sky account for us as well. And I've limited that interaction there to one, maybe twice a day at most, and for short, brief amounts of time, because every time we open up that any platform, honestly, my imposter syndrome goes through the roof. We're not doing enough. We're not talking enough. We're not sharing enough. Look at what this other company is doing. Look at what this other athlete is doing. Look at what this other person is doing. And it creates this immediate comparison game for me that there are moments where I have to literally just put it all down and put it away and just walk away from it and pick up a book, go for a walk, because my imposter syndrome goes sky high. I have it already to begin with. And then the digital media landscape, hammers away at that mind game for me in not good ways oftentimes. And you've experienced it. You'll get a series of texts from me like, we need to do more of this. 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 And that's not really healthy. And that's really not sticking to the idea of the vision and mission of the company, because now we're darting off into all these other different areas. And so it's hard, man. Like, it's really hard. I've gotten to the point with some of these platforms like LinkedIn. I go there in the morning and then I don't go there again for the rest of the day. And you know what? Nothing has changed there. And that lesson is being reinforced. If I go to Instagram twice a day, I'm going to engage and then I leave and then come back and then I leave. Everything that happens in the middle is still happening whether I'm there or not. So let it happen and move on from it when I'm not there. So yeah, dude, it's hard. It's really hard. And I've said this before, if it wasn't for the company, I probably wouldn't have half the platforms that we're on.
Yeah, it's just like, and it's, thinking about like the entire reason that we even started working together and I'm a part of this business is because you were starting to get that burnout from social media. You turned it over to me. We both experienced it, being in this space. And I'm glad you mentioned LinkedIn, because I know that that was a big part of the conversation, because you go on the Instagram space and you are dealing with the comparison to endurance sports in that space. You go to LinkedIn, you are now dealing with comparing yourself to other entrepreneurs and thinking that everybody else has their shit made and dealing with that imposter syndrome. So thank you so much for sharing that. Evan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, I just want to touch. You said imposter syndrome. I think I checked it down about 4 or 5 times. So I feel it as well too in a lot of areas. And I've been told that if you're not feeling imposter syndrome every 6 months, then you're doing something wrong.
6 months.
Because you're meant to be feeling it, because that means you're challenging yourself in ways that are putting you outside of your comfort zone. So just to add that piece in. Before I get to my question, so I know you've told me, Jason, that me telling my story, me sharing my story along with Ohm and all these other athletes that have written in stories to Run, Try, Bike has really made you stop and think about what your story is and how you want to share it. So first, I just want to say, I'm so proud of you for showing up today and being willing to share your story in this way, because I don't think, Ohm and I spoke about this yesterday, that so many people just see men as just like, having these like bro high fives and all this other stuff and not being able to actually talk about these things. So first, I just want to say that I'm super stoked that you're here and willing to share this, because I think it's going to touch a lot of people in a really profound way. So my question is going to take a little bit of a U-turn here. So endurance sports often come with pressures around weight, body image. Have you ever struggled with these pressures, and how did that affect your relationship with food, your body, your mental health?
They absolutely have. And I love food. That's the thing that I think has had the biggest impact on me, because I love food. But when I first got into endurance sports, specifically triathlon, there is, and there still is, this concept that lighter is faster. And I'm super competitive. Like, I want to be the best at everything that I do. I want to be at the top of the list at everything I do. And I fell into this trap of lighter is faster, lighter is faster. And if anybody goes to my personal Instagram account, they'll see at the beginning it was all pictures of food, because that's what got me going. And before I knew it, food started to take a back seat to weight. And I was hiding the food that I was eating from posting on Instagram, and only sharing like, here's a picture of X meal, right? What they weren't seeing was me in the pantry at 11 o'clock at night, shoveling donut holes into my face, shoveling candy into my mouth, being at an office and eating candy constantly because I was hungry, because I was restricting myself, because I felt lighter was faster. Um, Talking to Lori about 3 or 4 years ago, it hit me like a 2x4 to the face that I had disordered eating. Like I didn't realize it. And once that came about, it was easier for me to not hide myself from eating. So today I won't hide in the pantry eating, a donut. I will eat a donut. As a matter of fact, I'm actually posting pictures of me eating donuts now. And that's a way for me to combat this idea of hiding behind this fitter is equivalent to faster type of thing, or faster is equivalent to being fitter in a way and lighter and less weight. And so it's still a struggle. There are still days where I think to myself, why not just have a protein smoothie? And I'll convince myself that, well, there's protein and carbs in there, and that's what I need as an athlete. So I'm good there. Reality is that's like 150 calories, and I probably need to be eating, 5 to 600, and I need to eat something else and go down that path. And so my relationship with food was I struggled with it, and it's better today, but it's not perfect by any means. But it's getting better, and I think that for me is the success is taking that next step in getting better.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much for, as somebody who's also struggled with eating disorder, thank you so much for your vulnerability with that every single day. I don't think people realize that when you were posting these videos of you dancing with the vegan hot dog and like marching after smashing a bite of baguette, and like the donut video, like people see the 10-15 second video. They don't see what is behind that. And knowing you, like I see the importance behind those videos, the importance of being vocal with like and visual with like eating and food, and um, knowing that deeper surface level, it has a huge impact on me. Like even just seeing that video, what would, in any case, like we always joke about how those food videos that you make go viral, right? But we don't. But there's such a deep level behind that,
But
and
here's the thing about that, when I post a video or I share the video with you to post, like I put the phone away immediately afterwards. Like I don't want the reactions. I don't want to see the reactions. I kind of want to disconnect from it because it's not easy to do. It's still something I struggle with, right? Like it's it's funny, the vegan hot dog one. It's funny, and I love having humor in my life and showing people that you can have fun with food. Simultaneously, it's difficult because of this idea of me struggling with this idea that lighter is faster all along the way, and so it really is a double-edged sword, and I'm getting better with it, right? So we start with the donut video or the donut picture, and then we move to the vegan hot dog video, which led to the baguette video. Which so again, it's that progress. But initially, it was like, can I really post this? Can I put this out there to drum up laughter and fun and humor from an audience while simultaneously struggling with on the inside, right? Like that's the hard part that I have to deal with.
so I want to dig into, before I turn this over to Evan, I want to dig into that a bit deeper because the videos are just one component. We have we built an entire series called Food Fight Friday around food. We took it a step further and built Food Fight Friday at the Aid Station, one of our other shows. Not to mention a big backbone of our fireside chat is the rapid fire food section. So you mentioned kind of this internal conflict, almost like the two wolves or whatever. And I want you to dive a bit into like, talk a bit more about like those struggles and like, on the surface level, again, like it goes back to everybody's seeing like the fun with food and everything, and you are having fun with it, but also tell me a bit more about the other side of it, like struggling with the lighter is faster while you're putting out this content that is entertaining our community and our community loves? Do you feel, and to add on to that, do you feel pressure in any way to continue to do that while struggling with this side internally?
Those are a lot of loaded questions. Um,
You're welcome.
yeah, thank you. Now I know what it feels like to be on the other side. So let me say this: the Food Fight Friday at the aid station and the rapid food questions that we do at the end of our fireside chats are progress for me, because it helps take off this idea of restriction, right? It takes off this idea that, oh, I can't eat the Oreo. If I can talk about eating the Oreo and my favorite flavor of Oreo, that removes some of that stigma for me in terms of restricting myself. The thing about eating today versus, let's even go 10 years ago for me, I think it comes down to the sport. The sport of triathlon in and of itself is what triggered this disordered eating and being lighter is faster concept. Because when we measure our power output on our bikes, we're measuring it in watts per kilogram. So we're literally taking how much effort we're putting out, energy we're putting out, and measuring it against our weight and coming up with a number. And this idea, if you're at 2.5 watts per kilogram or 2.6 or 2.7, whatever the number is, if you can maintain your energy output and lower your weight, your watts per kilogram goes up, right? And so now I'm thinking about this idea of restricting myself and still being able to perform. And the reality is I was performing. Like I managed to race Ironman Chattanooga and do the bike and finish 112 miles of cycling in 20 miles per hour average, right? Like that's moving on a bike really fast. So that component reinforces it. Today, when I run a 100-miler or Cocodona 250, I've got to eat, right? If you sit in your house all day for 24 hours, you're going to have to eat to stay alive. Well, now I'm out here putting out energy and going 100 miles in 20 hours to 26 hours or 5 days at Cocodona. You've got to eat. And so you get rid of this idea for me that lighter is faster in those scenarios, because the only way to take that next step at a 100-miler or at a multi-day event is to be energized and eating. And so I think that the sport in and of itself is also, by moving away from Ironman triathlon into trail and ultra running, I think that has also helped with the disordered eating that I dealt with. And so doing that also now allows me to do the Food Fight Friday at the aid station and allows me to do the rapid fire at the end of our fireside chats without any anxiety. And if anybody goes back and listens to any of these shows, you will notice that I don't tell you never to not eat anything. Like we have a big joke about pineapple on pizza. It's not something I will ever do. I don't like it. It's not for me. But if you're going to do it, celebrate it, do it, enjoy it. I will never tell you not to do it, because that's just another form of restriction. Like get rid of the gatekeeping in a way.
Man, Jason, I love your responses, because you're not just telling your story, you're giving people tools and ways to manage something that they might be also going through, that they may now be listening to this and asking those questions that you were asking yourself of why am I doing this? Having that awareness and then putting action towards that awareness. So it's incredible. I love the answer so far. I want to turn it around to this idea that of control. So obviously doing these long endurance type events, whether it be triathlon, ultra running, any of these things, it's all about teaching us new tools and ways to manage our life. And I'm a firm believer that anything you can't control is teaching you how to let go. So how have you taken the lessons from the ultras, the triathlon, and also the lessons from the eating, and we can get more into the sobriety phase as well too. I know you have a story along those lines. So whether we'll call it addiction, I guess, because to be more broad, how have those two things helped one another? So how has the addiction and eating disorders helped the running and the triathlon, and how has the running and triathlon helped the other side? I'd like to hear both sides of it.
So When you first started asking the question, my immediate thought process went to outsourcing. And it's ironic because earlier this week, I saw 3 posts on LinkedIn about outsourcing. And this goes back to Ohm coming into the company, and he got hired as an employee, and I outsourced social media to him so that I could be less in control of that. Because if I'm trying to control everything all at once, I'm controlling nothing, in all honesty, right? Like the alcohol would be controlling me, the food would be controlling me, and so being able to outsource helps. And outsourcing in this case is talking about it, is having conversations about it, that are open and vulnerable, and they aren't within my own head. Because for years, through alcohol abuse, the conversations were in my own head, and I'm going to give myself leeway, I'm going to give myself an out if I'm only talking to myself. But when you talk to other people, you can pick up perspective, you can pick up stories, you can pick up ideas, and you can now start to make changes. It's when we live within our own heads that I think we get caught in this rinse, repeat cycle, wash, rinse, repeat cycle. And so by letting go of that stuff is what has really helped me. So if you think about running, having a pacer or a crew and turning it over to them and allowing them to guide you and help you through the process is going to be big in getting you to the finish line. Having a coach in triathlon made a big difference for me because it taught me to let it go and let somebody else put the plan together for me that's going to help me get to the finish line. I mean, this is a men's mental health podcast, and men are terrible at seeking help. We are terrible at it. But the reality is you have to outsource that stuff. You have to raise your hand and ask for help and say, I'm struggling with X, whatever X is. Can you help me? And so if anybody who's ever engaged me in conversation via email, text, live conversation like this, the conversation almost always ends with, what can I do to help you? Right? Because a lot of people are afraid to ask for help. So instead, I'll say, what can I do to help you, and give and open the door to them to say, actually, here's what I need. Conversely, I've had to be able to respond to people with what I need help with when they ask me that question. And it's interesting because it's become more of a control thing too. So now when people ask me, what can I help you with in a business setting, for argument's sake, I tell them, here's 2 things we always ask for. And that's the control, right? Maybe there's a third, a fourth, or a fifth thing that I need to put into that help request as well. But right now I've got only those 2 things because that's what I can control. And so now I need to move and grow. And this conversation will help me now ask for the third, fourth, or fifth thing that's on my list that I need help with.
Yeah, and I'm it's sounding like, again, like everything is just meshed together, whether it be the business, the personal goals and things you have with the running and triathlon, all of the addiction, the eating disorders. It seems like it's all connected. And I heard this entrepreneur who said that, you mentioned about offloading things, that it's better to have somebody do it at 80% of what you thought you could have done at 100%, if it frees you up for that extra time that you now have available for yourself. Like, the idea is, if you're not replacing yourself every 6 months, then you have something else to be doing. So
yeah. I've said this a couple of times this week already, and it's sort of a mantra for me to live by, which is I would much rather be bank account stable and time wealthy than to be bank account wealthy and time poor. Outsourcing things and allowing other people to do things for me will allow me the time to go be more creative, to go do things, to go for a run, go for a walk, just to get away and allow myself to process, and then not deal with waking up at 2:30 in the morning in a panic attack because I forgot to do X or Y or Z, right? If it's somebody else's responsibility and they're helping me, and that, to your point, at 80%, that's a lot better than me struggling to do it and panic attacking at 2:30 a.m. because it's under 100% under my control.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I have definitely struggled with is saying the words, I need help. And I want to ask you that same question. You are very much a person who says, what can I do to help you? Was it a journey for you to get to a place uh, to be able to ask for that help in return?
It's still on the journey, dude. I saw a post last week or maybe earlier this week, and I think we've all seen it where it's always, something along the lines of check on your friends who are always helping you or something to that effect, right? And it hit me like a ton of bricks because while we've been dealing with the wildfires here in LA, I have gotten a number of people checking in on us and seeing how we're doing and whether or not they can help us. And that was moving, like to the point of tears, because you don't see that in the social media space. You don't get that in the social media space. But here we are now getting text messages and DMs and asking if we can help you. And that will give me license to ask for more help. But it's still a process. It's still very difficult to say, I need help with this. It's much easier for me to say, how can I help you? And be the person who's always there for somebody else than to look around and say, hey, you need to be there for me.
I'll be honest. First off, like, thank you so much for sharing that. I could not agree more with those points. I'll be honest. I had a question going into your childhood, but you mentioned the LA wildfires, and I would be remiss if I didn't dive into that more because that's such a huge part of everything that is going on around us right now. And you've been vocal about it on social media, how it's affecting you on the mental side of it to have to sit there having a go bag ready, even with the fires around you contained, not knowing if the winds are going to pick up and you're going to be put in that situation where you are going to have to move, seeing the people around you having to evacuate, having to check in on friends, being checked in on by people who don't know what's going on from somewhere else, like Joe Harden. And I want to ask you, like, has it put a perspective on everything? You're still having to show up every day. You're still working on the business every day. You're continuing to live your life. But what is it? What is it like for your mindset to have that go bag ready, to have to be doing what is essentially like the world falling apart around you, around us?
Yeah, man. It's the wildfires have been like a low simmer boil on my stress. This idea that this area is devastated, and you see build. I saw a video of a car going down the PCH, which we do every weekend. We drive to Hermosa, Manhattan Beach, and we run down there, and seeing structures no longer existing on the ocean side of the PCH, not on the land side, but on the ocean side. So, meaning the fire jumped the highway and the destruction that took place, it is so hard to see. And knowing that there are people, families, businesses, pets that are impacted by that. So, it's been like a low level simmer for my stress level. And then when Lori and I were packing go bags, like, you're now making a decision. Do I take this? Do I not take this? Do I need this? Like, the things that are comforting to you in your house, you start to realize, I don't need this thing. This thing, screw this. I don't need to take it with me. Will it suck if it gets lost in a fire? Absolutely. But it's not important. And so I think the perspective that I've been able to gain because of the fires on what's important and what's not important has also been heightened. And it's interesting because at the end of last year, and you know this in all the conversations that we have had, is that perspective is key, right? So we have 3,000, 3,500 followers on Instagram. I don't know what the number is. To somebody who's got 30,000, that's nothing. To somebody who's got 300, that's a ton. And so perspective has been a key word for me. And now with the fires, it becomes even a bigger word for 2025 perspective. What we're doing is important. The conversations we're having are important. But there are other things, relationships, that are more important to me. And so I think, the fires have brought about a big perspective check. in the last week or so.
I appreciate you going into detail about, and I don't think there's a better description for it than a simmering stress that's adding to the stress that you already have on the day to day of running this business and all the other stresses you're dealing with. And I think that reframing that into perspective of what we truly need, how relationships matter the most, is probably, at least in my take, the best way you can make the best of what is a terrible situation around us. And so I appreciate you sharing that perspective, I should say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that gets lost when people see that we're business owners is that we don't um, feel stress about work or anything like that. And the reality is it's constantly stressful. I have a responsibility to you. I have a responsibility to Lori as shareholders in the company. I have a responsibility to every one of our marketing partners to deliver for them. I have a responsibility to our audience to present to them the best human interest stories in their endurance sports. I have responsibilities to our web designer and our graphic designer. I have responsibilities to our writers. Like that just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing and growing the number of responsibilities. I think one of the things that's a false equivalence is people think that you start a business and you're Amazon and you don't have to worry about anything. And the reality is, no, the vast majority of us are not Amazon. We are small. Some of us are micro businesses, but there are small to medium businesses out there that are not Amazon or Meta for that matter. And we need your support, and getting their support in the form of a share, of a like, of a comment, helps us to reduce that stress. It'll never go away, but it's certainly there. And then you add wildfires on top of it. Then you add imposter syndrome on top of it. Then you add, disordered eating or performance anxiety and stress when it comes to endurance sports, right? Like you're just constantly in there. So you have to find an outlet to, like a pressure cooker, you hit the button and the steam releases. You have to find an outlet to let that stress out.
Yeah, I love that, Jason. You mentioned time a few of your answers with regards to buying back more time or getting more time, whether it be business or when you're out on these ultra endurance events, it's time on feet. It's time, like time is a time is a construct, but it's also humans' perception of time is really measured in like pain, boredom, or irritation. So the more pain you're in, the longer it's going to feel like you're in it for it. So in saying that, how have you found your journey from addiction, disordered eating, and really turned that pain into purpose through your business, through reaching out to other individuals, and through your really athletic endeavors? How would you say you've turned that into a superpower now?
One word comes to mind as you're asking the question. It's empathy. And I think it's this is the perfect place to have this conversation, is on a men's mental health podcast. You're not a man because you grunt or because you're tough or you're hard or like you're that's not the definition of man, right? To me, if you can have empathy and you can hear and listen to what somebody else is saying, which means you have to be present. So pardon me in the way I'm going to phrase this, but put your fucking phone down when I'm talking to you. Put your fucking phone down when we're having a conversation. Stop scrolling, because what you're telling me in that moment is I'm not important, which then means I'm going to stop listening to you. So put your phone down, spare the 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes that we're going to share together, and let's have a conversation and engage each other so I can hear you, I can be empathetic to you, I can help you, and return that back to me. And I think when we can get to that place in society, I think we'll all be happier. And it's not because, I hacked my way to this body, or I hacked my way to speed, or I hacked my way to whatever it is people are hacking their way to. And so to now tie it into running, like, it's funny. Again, I go back to this comparison of triathlon and ultra running. When I was on my bike and I'm screaming past somebody who's got a flat tire at 23 miles an hour, help sounds like this. How can I help help you? Because I'm now half a mile down the road before they can even answer the question, right? Whereas in ultra and trail running, there are moments of hiking, walking, standing at an aid station, and you're literally asking somebody else, "Can I help you? What can I give you? What can I take out of my hydration pack?" And I think the reality is, in ultra and trail running, we are slowed down, and when we slow down, we can go faster together. Whereas if you use my triathlon example, if I'm half a mile down the road and that person is still trying to change a flat tire behind me, they're going nowhere, right? I'm on my own. I'm way ahead of the pack. And so I think if we can be empathetic and slow down in life, I think we can then value our time, because then we can see what it's worth, because we're doing it with people and we're paying attention and we're present with them all at the same time.
Yeah, there's so few places left in this world like an ultra or these events where you can put yourself into that place and you have no choice but to be present in that space. We're really a generation of more worried about how our life looks than how it feels. And that's why, like I've said it before, like we're in an epidemic of not knowing how to feel, because we have all these devices and these things that are interrupting our thought patterns and all these other pieces. So yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jason. Empathy. I think it's a good reminder for everybody to just stop every now and then, put the phone down, put it away.
Yeah, I think, the phone has its place, right? So if you think of somebody, so if I think of Evan, I should text him, I should email him, I should call him in that moment, as opposed to thinking, well, he's so busy, right? Yeah, we're all busy being busy, but where we're not busy is being in connection with each other. And that's where we should be busy.
I agree with that. And again, this is just the nature of this conversation and the nature of the Enduring Minds piece. But I had a question written down, and now I have another question. When we went to the running event in Austin, we were hanging out at the airport. We ended up sitting next to a man who ended up being Stephen Glickman, who was ended up being a big Hollywood personality who was on Big Time Rush, and didn't know the guy from Adam. We just had a normal conversation with him, found out he had a deep human story and struggle with his own men's mental health issues and suicidal ideation, among many things. But the fact that we sat at that table, put our phones down, and we just talked, laughed at Denim Santa, which was our connector, which Evan was an actual thing in Austin, and not the strangest thing you'll see in Austin. But like, I want you to know that like that conversation for me, like it's one thing to say go touch grass and like talk to people, and for me as an introvert to sit there and watch you and Lori just start this conversation, engage with Steven, and also be roped into the conversation, taught me a big lesson about putting my phone down and talking to the people around us. And I've heard of some of your, not to go long winded, but some of your other interactions, like the guy who was carrying, I think, mint chocolate chip ice cream in one hand
Yes.
at the grocery store. And like you happened to make a comment to him, and it just like, it's not always people are going to be receptive, but like you never know what you're going to find out. And we have this epidemic, as Evan said, about like just we're just so glued to our phones and we've stopped connecting. And I want you to talk more about like just connecting to other people and talking to people around you, because that moment was profound for me and it taught me a big lesson.
Yeah, I blessing and a curse of being an extrovert is I will talk to anybody. And the story that you referenced is I went to the grocery store. It was like 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. This guy had a pint of mint chocolate chip ice cream in one hand and a pint of coffee caramel ice cream in the other. And I just said to him, "Not all heroes wear capes." And he gave me this look like, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Anybody who goes to the grocery store specifically for mint chocolate chip ice cream and coffee caramel ice cream is on a mission for either themselves or for somebody else. Like, you just don't go to the grocery store just for those two things. Like, he didn't walk out with other stuff." And he realized, and he laughed. And I just think that that's being, me being me, and again, the blessing and the curse of being able to just talk to anybody, anywhere. I could fill this whole show with stories of me just saying something to somebody on the street, and having a conversation with them. And it's in passing, 30, 60, 90 seconds. But I do think that what has happened is we're now walking down the street with our head down in our phones, and we're not looking up, and we're not looking at opportunities that are all around us to have a conversation, to ask somebody for help, because we're so ingrained in the latest viral TikTok video, which in the grand scheme of things makes us laugh in the moment, but doesn't last forever, right? If you think about the last time you laughed at a TikTok video versus the last time you had an impactful conversation, I can guarantee you the impactful conversation is going to last a lot longer. One of the examples I love to give about virality is the cranberry ocean spray dude on the skateboard, right? It was, I don't even remember the music, but that's the perfect example. I remember the dude on the skateboard, and I remember it was ocean spray cranberry juice, but I have no idea who the musical artist is. I can tell you, I remember the conversations that you and I had when we were at Tahoe 200 and we were making our way through to the finish line, and we put in the quote, the movie on YouTube from Al Pacino, where we talked about inches are everywhere. And I started crying in the middle of Tahoe 200 pacing you because it was so profound. I think those are the things that we should be focusing on, is that, 30, 60, 90-second engagement with people, including strangers. And because that's going to last a long time. Look, you referenced a story that in the grand scheme of things is minuscule in life, right? But it impacted you and you remember it. And now anybody who listens to this show is going to remember it. And so I think that's the key to it all, is like the domino effect of telling those stories and sharing those moments in life, which is exactly why this company is what this company is.
Yeah, I think those moments are so important. I think that Tahoe 200 moment was profound for me as well. And hearing about, then I just, I keep replaying that clip in the hopes of like recapturing that moment. But once the moment's gone, it's gone. And I think that with social media and everything, we forget to like hone in on the moment and just feel the moment with all your senses while you're in it. And
Yeah, but don't let it pass, right? Like, don't let this idea of that moment at Tahoe has come and gone. Remember that moment and then go watch the clip again, right? And reinforce it, because now you're going to have that in your mind for the next conversation that you have. I can't tell you how often this idea of inches are around us everywhere comes up in conversation with Lori and myself, with other business owners, with people in general, right? Reinforcing it is the thing to do, right? So instead of scrolling on TikTok for 3 minutes or scrolling Instagram for 3 minutes, go watch that 3 minute clip and reinforce it and be reminded of it and be inspired and motivated by it. I think if we do that versus, again, going to TikTok or Instagram or wherever for 3 minutes where you're just scrolling, that's going to make the difference. And that's what's going to be the change.
All right, Jason, I know we haven't known each other for a long time, but I know you're a big thinker and you think bigger than what you should even probably think is possible, which is amazing. So I want to go to this idea that we were talking about with the real life connections, the, getting out of your phones and bringing things into real life. And I know we've discussed, in the past, like retreats and other things. For Run, Try, Bike, I get the sense that a long-term goal or vision is to move this out of the digital space and be able to bring people together in real life. So if money was no object today, and I said, in 3 years, where do you want that part of the business to be? I want to hear what your answer would be to that.
Woo. Great question. So, man. All right. So first things first, Lori and I have discussed a running shoe store that is also a coffee shop and podcast studio. A running shoe store gets people in there, gets people talking, you have conversations, you have connections. Coffee does the same thing. And so in that realm right there, you're bringing in people who may not be runners that want a cup of coffee, and then C, the running side, because we believe that endurance sports helps us in so many ways. And when I say endurance sports, I don't mean going and doing an Ironman or a 100-miler or 250-miler. I mean, go do the 5K, go for the 2-mile walk, the 20-minute walk, like get outside. And so having the coffee shop connected to the running shoe store brings that connection between sport and non-sport. And then having the podcast studio allows for people to hear conversations like this in real time. Like, let's have an audience. So that's one of the dreams. Another dream, and I think we're putting it into effect already, is doing panel discussions. Like, let's go to places and have panel discussions about endurance sports and their impacts on our lives. Positively, hey, I did something I didn't think I could ever do. And negatively, yes, I stopped eating, certain foods because lighter was faster. And let's have those panel discussions at different events. TRE could be one of them. We could do it at, one of the ideas is doing it at car dealerships in various cities all across the country where they have open spaces for us to get to. I think that in-person style is another vision for me. And then you mentioned retreats. It's something that we're working on for this year. I would love to go from a single retreat to quarterly, where we have 4 of them a year in different parts of the country. Because look, I know not everybody can travel places. And if we can make it convenient for them to get to a place, then I'd love to do that. And I think all of that comes down to this idea of connecting on the human level in a spatial awareness setting too, right? Think about this. When we train, the vast majority of us train solo. So we put on our running shoes, we go out the door, we go run, we get lost in the woods, we come back. But the palpable energy when you go to a starting line and you're now surrounded by 100, 200, 300 people, or if it's an Ironman, 1,500 people, 2,000 people, like, it is energetic. Well, let's take that for a run, try, bike and make that the scenario where we're not training on our own. We're actually amongst a group of people and feeling that energy. I think if we can do that, man, sky's the limit. And it's big dreaming. Money is no object, as you said, but I do think that those are the things that we can get to because we're putting a path in place to get to those places.
Yeah, I agree. And we're doing it in a way where we have this amazing community of everyday athletes that is like not one type of person, but all these different stories. And one of my favorite things about building that energetic space in this setting is that when people say like, when people talk about like not having room on the table, we say we're just going to build a bigger table. And I
One of my
appreciate,
favorite statements.
yeah, that's a trademark Jason statement right there. And a big reason why we do what we do is come to our table, we'll build a bigger table.
That's it, man. The more people we can have at the table, the more we can learn. Is my belief. That's always been my thought process. If we're all saying the same thing, we're not growing and learning and getting out of our comfort zone. Excuse me. And I mean, it's cliche, right? Growth happens outside the comfort zone, but it's a cliche for a reason because it's true. Another one of my favorite sayings, and I've been posting it all morning because of Joe Harden's post about being on the cover of our magazine a year ago, is take risks and bet on yourself, right? And when I say that, I don't mean take like uncalculated risks, like don't just go spend money to spend money and be like, I'm taking a risk. Like that's going to create more stress in the long run. But if you can take a risk and bet on yourself, I think good things come from that. And then that snowball effect occurs. And look, there's going to be peaks and valleys in those scenarios. It's never just going to be straight up hockey stick growth. You're going to have peaks and valleys along the way, but that's part of the process. That's part of the learning. That's part of the growth that happens. And yeah, man, I like all just talking about this right now is getting me excited. Like my palms are not as sweaty anymore as they were at the beginning.
Before I turn it over to, well, they're about to be sweaty again. before I turn it over to Evan for our last segment, I want to circle back. So this is a question that I had. It's not so much of a U-turn anymore because it fits right into this concept of like building a bigger table and building this community. We have a parallel in our childhoods, a very similar but different kind of thing in our childhoods. You grew up in the Bronx, and at some point in your life, like you were put into what was, if I'm not mistaken, more of in like a affluent school in a different neighborhood.
That is an understatement, dude. In a much different neighborhood. In other words, moving from the Bronx to the northern end of Rockland County would be like moving from Anaheim to Thousand Oaks.
And so one of the words that comes to mind that we've used a lot is disruptor. And you were forced from a very early age to try to like, I think that everybody everybody wants to belong to a space. Everybody wants to fit in, especially when you were a kid just trying to find your space. Do you so talk about like what that was like trying to fit those molds, trying to create your own mold, and do you think that that shaped do you think that that eventually shaped and paved the road to you being that disruptor?
100%. So that production value there was not planned. The ringing of the bell, by the way.
It was the ringing of your mind.
Yeah. Um, I'm glad we got to talk. We're getting to talk about my childhood and how it has shaped me as a person. So you mentioned I grew up in the Bronx, which I did, and I always preface that by saying I lived in Riverdale, but I lived down the hill, meaning we didn't live in the affluent part of Riverdale, which does have money. My parents moved my sister and I to Rockland County. I was about 12 years old, and I always say this. I wound up going to school with Tyler's and Kevin's and Suzanne's when I was going to school with Juan's and Jose's first. And so that change was massive. And now I'm trying to figure out, how do I fit in here? How do I fit into this neighborhood of people that doesn't look like me, doesn't eat the same food that I eat as a kid, doesn't speak Spanish the way my parents did? And imposter syndrome, I believe my imposter syndrome started there, right? I'm no longer being who I am so I could fit in with this group. I am white presenting. Like, it's not lost on me that the privilege that I have gotten in my life is because I am white presenting with a name like Jason, right? Now, people don't hear my last name, so they don't think anything of it yet. When I say Bahamundi, they just automatically think I'm Persian in some sense. So um, the imposter syndrome of fitting in continues to build. I get into college, I go hang out with more of the same. I get into my first job and I'm fitting into that crowd in that scenario, all the while thinking to myself, I'm Puerto Rican. Like, I don't speak Spanish. My parents didn't teach me Spanish. I didn't get babysat by a Hispanic person. I got babysat by a Michelle, a white woman as a kid. And I could feel myself losing who I was and removing myself from being the New York City kid from the Bronx. And so that, I believe, the imposter syndrome started then and continued to grow. And then one day I had a conversation with Lori, and she just said, be yourself. And being myself meant being that Puerto Rican kid from the Bronx, that kid who loves to sing and dance and be goofy and laugh at shit and have in-depth conversations, and just that layer of onion getting peeled back and being allowed, right? Shall I say, the freedom to be myself has changed everything for me in the last 4 years, but especially last year. And the reason why I bring up last year is I lost my mother last year, and um, we used to sit on the couch watching the Mets. And I will never forget this. I was a huge Gary Carter fan. My mother loved Keith Hernandez. And we would argue, quote unquote, argue about who was the better Met. And one day she said, yeah, well, Keith Hernandez is the better Met because he's Mexican. And I looked at her like, what the fuck does that mean? We're Puerto Rican. Like, who cares if he's Mexican? But that was her like end all be all argument. And I cannot stop laughing about it, thinking about it. And then the Mets had a great year last year. and they leaned heavily into their Latin players. Jose Iglesias, who is Cuban, puts out a number one Latino pop hit called OMG, and his stage name is Candelita. And Edwin Diaz is walking into Citi Field with a song by Timmy Trumpets called Narcos, and it is just the craziest beat, and it's just full on Latin flavor. And that put so much pride in me that the whole idea of not being Puerto Rican and not telling people I'm Puerto Rican went away, right? One of the best Mets is Puerto Rican, Francisco Lindor, right? He's Puerto Rican, and that's a sense of pride for me. One of the best players to ever play the game is Roberto Clemente, and he's a sense of pride for the whole island for us. And so that move going from the Bronx to Rockland County had me put up a barrier of I'm not Latin and I'm not Puerto Rican. And it took me until I was basically 45, 46, 47 years old to now stand up with pride and say, no, I am Puerto Rican and I'm proud of being Puerto Rican, and remove that component. And so now it's starting to chip away at the imposter syndrome at the same time. Thank you for that question. I didn't mean to get choked up talking about my mother, but for most of us, our parents are a big part of our lives, and having lost her last year was a big loss for me, because while my mother couldn't give a shit about baseball, in all honesty, she sat on the couch and watched it with me because her son wanted to watch baseball. And that was one of our big connections.
Man, Jason, that share was hard, heavy, and beautiful all at the same time, man. Appreciate you sharing that.
I was hoping we would get to my childhood, because I think that's a big. I read Jamel Hill tweet. This is probably like 4 or 5 years ago, and she tweeted out, "We never outrun our childhood," and that has stuck with me since she tweeted it out. Like I said, 4 or 5 years ago, and it's been like a guiding light that has allowed me to talk about my childhood more and more and more. And it also shows that we can overcome the traumas that we've faced. It doesn't mean you do it overnight, right? But you can overcome it if you do want to, and if you want to work at it.
Yeah, sounds like you found your little Jason and learned how to play again.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So we're going to end today's episode with a little something new. We thought we would test it out on Jason because I know he loves new ideas and new things. So we're going to use it for future guests as well, too. So the segment is titled Stop, Start, Continue. And the basis of it is on the Japanese tradition of misogi. I don't know. Are you familiar with what misogi is, Jason?
Om gave me a little bit of insight into it, but I think the audience would benefit from knowing it all.
Sure. So at its core, misogi is about transformation. It's about shedding old habits, beliefs, ideas, and really embracing and letting in a new, more powerful version of yourself. And at the same time, letting go and surrendering in order to succeed in that growth. So we're going to be inviting other Enduring Minds members of the community, athletes, part of the Everyday Athlete podcast, to be a part of this in a bigger way. So watch out for more of that as we kind of cement this. But I'm going to go ahead with the first question. So this is your stop question, Jason. If you had to choose one mental or emotional habit you want to leave behind this year, what would it be and why?
Questioning myself on whether or not I'm good enough to do it. I am. The reality is I am good enough to do it. I have built a company with help from a lot of people over the last 5 years that is recognized in this space. And I need to stop questioning whether or not we belong here, because the reality is we do belong here. But I still question myself on a constant basis. Like, do we reach out to this person? Do we reach out to that person? Are we good enough to be part of their marketing strategy? And the answer is we are. We're good enough.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. Very succinct. I like it. Your second question, your start question. If you were to commit to a radical mental shift this year that would force you to grow in new ways, what would it be and why?
I think the thing that I'm a very confident person. I do believe I can do anything, but then I put up this wall of excuses as to why I can't do it. So I need to start doing the thing instead of putting up the wall as the first step to the start. Like, start the thing, go do the thing.
Yeah, take the action
Yep.
is what I'm hearing. That's my word for 2025 is action. So we're all doing the thing. All right. The third and final question for you is your continue question. If you had to symbolically cleanse or renew one aspect of your mental health in the next year, what would it be and why?
Ooh.
Something that you're already doing that you want to do, keep going with and do better.
Yeah, I think it's talking to people. Because for me, and when I say talk, I mean talk like this. I don't mean texting. I don't mean emailing. That's not talking. That's writing and reading, but talking to people. And that's already started to happen. We have these conversations here, but on LinkedIn, I reached out to Sean Bemis and I said to him, "Hey man, if you just want to chat, let's chat." And we've got a call scheduled for next week already. I interviewed Andrew Marmion late last week, I should say, and I was like, "Dude, if you want to just talk, we don't have to do an interview. We can just talk." And that's on the schedule as well for us to just have a conversation in the middle of nowhere. So I think that continuing of let's just talk to talk, not let's just not talk to have business, not talk to interview you for a story. Like let's just chat. I think is the thing that I want to continue to do more of this year as we progress and get closer to each other by being more engaged with each other and present with each other.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, before I close this out, one of the things I appreciate, even in our interactions with us, is if one of us is having a rough time, we put aside the business during our meetings. And you're the first to say the business will always be there. First off, I want to ask you, how are you? And so I feel like you were already on the path you were already doing your best to live that principle and continue that principle.
So that is a lesson I learned from my mentor, Bill Schroeder. In a business setting, in a new setting, the thing that we almost all gravitate towards as the opening line in a conversation is, "What do you do for a living?" Honestly, that's boring. I don't like. Who cares what you do for a living? So Bill taught me that ask something. He would always ask somebody in a new meeting is, "What do you do for fun?" Right? Immediately that goes to a happy place. That puts a smile on a person's face and they are open to conversation immediately. And so I think when we have our business meetings, and for anybody, right, we should be having those conversations from that perspective, from that standpoint. What do you do for fun? We're going to get into business. We know why we're here for the conversation. We know why we're here for the meeting. We're going to talk about it, of course. Especially if you go to like a networking event, right? Like you always know that. Or if you're at the starting line of a race, like asking somebody what you do for a living, like boring. Let's talk about something that's fun. And I will share a story with you guys that I think is apropos to why we should be having more fun and doing more things like this. I raced Ironman Louisville a number of years ago. I think it was 2017. And a friend of mine was at the starting line with me, and you have to do a mile walk basically before you get into the water for the swim. And this was her first Ironman, and her face was like ashen and stress filled and anxiety filled. And I was like, we got to change this because otherwise she's going to have a miserable day out here. And I just made this face of relaxation and contentment. And she's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm peeing in my wetsuit right now. And it is the greatest feeling ever." And she just let out the loudest laugh. And she was like, "That's exactly what I needed." Now imagine if I would have said to her, "Well, the weather looks beautiful today. We should have a great day." Like that's just going to add anxiety to her race. So, break it up the expected conversation with something different. Like Bill would say, "What do you do for fun?" I mean, it just changes the conversation immediately. So I wanted to share that as well because Bill's been a big part of shaping the way I run this business.
Yeah, it's Yeah, I've heard, I feel like I've known Bill through all the stories about him, and I just, I was just thinking about like all the stories, like you have essentially passed on a lot of Bill's teachings over to me, and they have shaped me as an entrepreneur, and as a human being. And appreciate your mentorship and appreciate learning more about Bill's teachings through you. Um, and so, we could honestly, between the three of us, we could honestly do like a 10-hour show, and like we couldn't like, I don't want this conversation to end. I honestly think that we'll have to do follow-ups with the three of us as well. Uh, and I'm excited to see what comes with the Enduring Minds movement. So I want to thank you for your vulnerability, Jason, and being on the other side of the table. And I want to thank our audience for joining us on episode 3 of the Enduring Minds podcast, proud part of the Everyday Athlete Podcast Network, one of 9 amazing shows. Now, all three of us have been on the other side of the table. You can watch episode 1 with Evan and episode 2 with me. And on Saturday, you'll be able to watch episode 3 with Jason as well, everywhere you find your podcast under the Everyday Athlete Podcast Network. So I'm excited for what's to come. On the next episode, episode 4, we're going to bring on our first guest. So stay tuned for who that is. And you'll find out more details soon about the Misogi Challenge as well. Let's go the distance and break the silence together.
Thanks, guys.